Yo, what's up guys? It's Noah here, and in today's video, we're going to break down the Thursday Night Football Showdown slate on Draftkings for Week 7. We got Week 7 kicking off with the Giants and the Eagles on Thursday night. We're going to break down this Showdown slate, talk about all the playable options, work through the player pool from top to bottom, hit on all the guys that I do have interest in for this Showdown slate. And towards the end of the video, we'll talk about roster construction, how I'm looking to build out my lineups, who I want to play at captain, whether I want to pay up or if I think there's some cheap captains that are viable. I'll be sure to touch on that as well. But before we do break down the slate, guys, would appreciate it if you would hit that like button down below. Hit the subscribe button as well if you are new here. I do cover the Thursday Night Football and Monday Night Football Showdown slates every week. I'm also getting up videos every week for the main slate as well. 4 to 5 videos a week on this channel. So I got a ton of NFL content coming out on the channel right now. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell as well, so that way you never miss out on any of my new videos. You do get a notification sent to your phone whenever I do upload a new video. But yeah, let's go ahead and break down the Showdown slate. It's not the best game overall between the Giants and Eagles. I think pretty low total here, just a 45 total right now. Eagles favored by 4.5, but once again, DraftKings continues to run out huge contests for these Showdown slates. These are very popular. Everyone loves to play these. They're very casual friendly. You're seeing huge tournaments every week for these, and we have that once again for this Thursday night game. So we'll start off at the top of the player pool. We'll talk about the two quarterbacks first. They are the two most expensive options. You have Carson Wentz at $10,800 if you want to play him in the flex, and then you have Daniel Jones for $10,400. So just talking about the two quarterbacks, if I can only choose one, I think I would rather go with Carson Wentz. I think Carson Wentz is one of my preferred, kind of pay up options on this Showdown slate. I say it pretty much every video that I break down Showdown. You're usually going to want at least one quarterback in your lineup, if not both quarterbacks. Rarely do you see neither quarterbacks in the winning lineup. Like usually you're going to see at least one of the two in the winning lineup. Sometimes you'll see both quarterbacks. Quarterbacks just, they project the highest. They have the highest floor. Even a bad game from a QB is still like 15 points. Maybe Daniel Jones, his floor might be a little bit lower than some quarterbacks, but so far this season, Carson Wentz's worst game of the season was against the Rams, and he still put up, 14, which it's not really killing you. Like we see receivers, a floor game from a receiver is like 6-7 fantasy points. You're just not going to see that from quarterbacks most of the time. So I always have interest in the quarterbacks. I do like this matchup a lot for Carson Wentz. I think he is one of the better pay-up options on this slate. I don't know if I'm going to be playing him at captain just because I don't know if his ceiling is higher than some receivers. Receivers and running backs, I should say. Pass catchers in general usually are the way I want to go at captain. But Carson Wentz is captain viable for me. He does, have rushing upside. We've seen him so far this season. He has 4 rushing touchdowns. Got one last week against Baltimore, 30 DK points. Like he has a 30-point ceiling. He can go out there and do it through the ground, do it with his legs. Usually, if I'm going to play a quarterback at captain, it has to be a quarterback that can, that has some rushing upside, that just has a big ceiling. Normally, you don't want to play quarterbacks at captain that have to throw for 5 touchdowns to, put up a ceiling game, because if they're throwing for 5 touchdowns, it's very likely that, one of their receivers is having a big game. Whereas Carson Wentz, he could throw for 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then go for, 50 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, put up 30 fantasy points, and none of his receivers, put up massive games. So I think Carson Wentz is captain viable. I'm not going to X him out of the captain spot, but, we'll talk about some of these cheaper options. You have like Darius Slayton for cheaper, Travis Fulgham, who's been awesome, Boston Scott starting with Miles Sanders out. Miles Sanders not playing, so Scott will get the start. He's definitely captain viable. These are probably the guys I'm going to be looking to a captain, but I wouldn't mark out Carson Wentz as a captain play. Between him or Jones, like I said, I would rather play Wentz, but I think Daniel Jones is definitely in play. Like, he hasn't had a great season. His best game of the season was Week 1 against the Steelers, probably one of his toughest matchups, and he put up 19 DraftKings points. He's been pretty bad for fantasy this year, but it's a single-game Showdown slate. I'm definitely going to have exposure to Jones, but if I can only play one of the two quarterbacks, I would rather go with Carson Wentz, but it really does come down to roster construction. In lineups where I maybe play a Giants pass catcher at captain, like say I build out a lineup with Slayton at captain or Evan Engram at captain, then I'm probably going to want to play Daniel Jones in those lineups, because if I'm assuming that Slayton or Engram has a big game, very likely that Daniel Jones is contributing to that. So that's just my thoughts there. Summing it up, if I can only play one of the two quarterbacks, I do prefer Carson Wentz. Miles Sanders is out, though, so I guess we'll talk about the running backs next. So you have Boston Scott at 8,400, and then you have Devonta Freeman at 7,400. Boston Scott, I do have a lot of interest in here. So we saw the same scenario. I think it was week 2 or week 1. Or no, it was week 1 against Washington. Miles Sanders was out. Boston Scott was very popular on the main slate, and he really disappointed. Only had 9 carries for 35 yards, 2 catches for 19 yards, finished with 7.4 DK points. He did get hurt in that game, I believe, later on in the third quarter, but it kind of didn't matter. I mean, he was already really, underperforming. I don't want to buy too much into that, though. We've seen in the past, especially last season, whenever Scott got the opportunity to play, Sanders did miss a good amount of games last year. Boston Scott did show a lot of upside. He's a great pass catcher. They will use him a ton in the passing game. He has the potential to get 20-plus touches here. I don't expect Corey Clement to be involved much at all. Clement was barely involved last week whenever Sanders went down. I'm pretty sure Sanders did get hurt in their game last week, and I don't think Clement got any touches, but let me just confirm that. So, yeah, he didn't touch the ball at all in their game against Baltimore. We did see Boston Scott come into that game, got two rushing attempts, also got 2 catches. He was targeted 4 times. He pretty much took over from Miles Sanders and was just out there every play. So I'm expecting a heavy workload for Scott. Is he going to play 100% of the snaps? No, obviously not. Corey Clement will be involved. He's going to get some touches, but I do expect a pretty big workload for Scott. I expect him to be the number 1 running back. If they get down to the goal line, I assume he's going to be the guy punching it in. I like him a lot at 8,400. I think he has a lot of upside. I think he's definitely one of the better captain plays overall on this slate. I do like him quite a bit. And then Devonta Freeman, I think, is also in play. He's kind of taken over this backfield just the last few weeks. Got 19 touches against Dallas, 19 touches last week against Washington. He's been their number 1 running back. Wayne Gallman really isn't involved much. Gallman, I don't think, got many touches at all last week or the week before that. Gallman got 7 touches last week, 6 the week before that. Dion Lewis, I don't believe, has been involved at all. He's barely played. Yeah, he got 1 touch last week and 2 the week before that. So it is clearly Devonta Freeman's backfield. They signed him for a reason. They signed him to play him, and we've seen that be the case. If I can only choose one of the running backs, I do prefer Boston Scott. I like the matchup more for Scott. I think he gives us a little bit more upside. But Devonta Freeman's looked good. He looked really good in that game against the Cowboys. I did watch a good amount of that game. Freeman was pretty explosive. He was pretty involved as well. We know he's had history where, he's shown upside when he was with Atlanta. He's a guy that can go out there and handle a heavy workload, is involved in the passing game. I like Freeman too, but, if I can only choose one of the 2 running backs, I do prefer Boston Scott, but I think it's definitely viable to play both RBs. I think both do give you plenty of upside, so I do have interest in both running backs in this game. Now, talking about pass catchers, we'll start off with receivers. So you got Darius Slayton, 9,200, Travis Fulgham, 8,800, Evan Engram, 8K. Those are just some of our more expensive pass catchers. We'll start off with Slayton at 9,200. I think Darius Slayton is definitely a guy you can look to. I don't think he's my favorite pay-up option, though. I think I would rather save salary and play Fulgham. I think I would rather save salary and play Boston Scott. But you could definitely target Darius Slayton. He has clearly been the number 1 receiver for the Giants this season, especially with Sterling Shepard on IR. Slayton has really taken over that number 1 role. I thought, whenever Shepard went down, that Evan Engram would be more involved, but that really hasn't been the case recently. It's hard to trust many of the Giants pass catchers just because of how bad their passing game has been this year, of how bad Daniel Jones has been. But if I can only play one Giants pass catcher, I think Slayton is the guy I think gives you the most upside. His target floor is the highest as well. I do have interest in him at 9,200, but like I said, I think I'd rather save salary and play Travis Fulgham, especially because I have way more interest in Carson Wentz, so that's automatically going to make me have more interest in the Philly pass catchers. And Travis Fulgham, he's been really good, man. Just the last 3 weeks, he didn't get much volume week 4 against San Fran, but last 2 weeks with no Alshon Jeffrey, with no Dallas Goedert, no DeSean Jackson. DeSean Jackson is expected to be back for this game, but Jeffrey's still going to be out. Goddard's on the IR. He's going to be out. Zach Ertz is also going to be out, and then Miles Sanders will be out as well. This Philly team is just dealing with so many injuries, and we've seen Fulgham really step up just the last 2 games, getting heavy volume, 13 targets against Pittsburgh, 10 targets against Baltimore. He scored in 3 straight games, coming off 2 big games, 34 and 19 DraftKings points. I mean, even with DeSean Jackson coming back, it's very likely that Travis Fulgham is the number 1 receiver for the Eagles right now. I don't even think it's likely. I think, he is the number 1 receiver, especially with no Ertz either. They are going to target Fulgham a ton. he might see some shadow coverage from James Bradberry, who's been really good this year, but I usually don't, look too much into cornerback matchup on a showdown slate. I'm just going to play the guys that I think give me the most upside, and that's the case with Travis Fulgham. Like, he's been so good lately. All the injuries to the Phillies pass catchers has allowed him to step into a pretty big role, and we've seen that be the case, especially the last 2 games with him getting double-digit targets in both games. So I really like Travis Fulgham. I think him and Boston Scott are probably my 2 favorite captain plays, like in this mid-tier range. Definitely have interest in both those guys. I do like both those guys a ton. Evan Engram, someone I've been on a ton on the main slate. Like, I've played him in cash the last 3 weeks on the main slate. Played him in cash last week against Washington. Played him in cash against Dallas. Played him in cash against the Rams. And he's been so disappointing, man. 9 DraftKings points, 9 DK points, 5 DK points. He did have a touchdown taken off the board in that Dallas game. He could have had a much bigger game. He had a touchdown taken away on a fake field goal. Look, it's really hard to trust Evan Engram right now. He's just not getting the volume. They're just not involving him like I thought they would. I thought going into this year, Evan Engram was probably going to finish the year as like a top 5 tight end in fantasy. And, he's going to have to do a lot rest of the season for that to be the case. Sure, he's always a guy that does have upside. He's very athletic. He's one of the more athletic tight ends in the league. But he is pretty hard to trust right now, just not getting the volume, not as involved as I would like him to be. I do feel more confident in guys like Boston Scott, Travis Fulgham. Even, you could save salary, play Devonta Freeman, who he knows probably going to get close to 20 touches. You could save salary and play like Golden Tate. Golden Tate hasn't been great lately, but I just don't see myself going to much Engram. It's just hard to trust him right now. He's not as involved as I would like him to be. There's just other guys I think I would rather play. If I'm building out a lineup, if I'm hand building a lineup and I have, 1 spot left in my lineup and I have 8K left for the flex, obviously I'm not going to try and, reconstruct my lineup. I'm fine plugging in Evan Engram if he's like one of my last guys in, but I don't see myself building around him. I don't think he's going to be like a core play for me by any means. So that's just my thoughts there. Moving down towards the 6K range, looking at these cheaper receivers, you have Golden Tate for 6,600. Kind of similar to Evan Engram. Like, he's really hard to trust right now. Only got 1 target last week against Washington, 5, 6, 7 targets the week before that. Tate always is a guy that has shown some upside in the past, kind of similar to what I said with Evan Engram. Like, I thought whenever Sterling Shepard went on IR, like that would just help Golden Tate, help Evan Engram, and neither one of those guys have been doing much of anything. Like I said earlier, really the only Giants pass catcher who's been doing something recently is Darius Slayton. Sure, these guys could always come out, and put up a solid game. Tate has shown upside in the past, but I think I'd rather save some salary. We'll talk about DeSean Jackson. He may be hard to trust coming back from injury, but DeSean Jackson is a guy that has shown massive upside when he's healthy. He's only 5,800. Between Tate or Jackson, I think I would rather play D-Jax at 5,800. We'll talk about him next. D-Jax is probably one of my favorite cheaper options on this showdown slate. It is his first game back from injury. He's not listed as questionable, though. They've already come out and said that he is going to play. It was a hamstring injury. Those are always concerning, especially for a guy like DeSean Jackson that has always shown, injury history in the past when it comes to hamstring injuries. Him and Julio Jones. Those are 2 guys I always am concerned with whenever they have a hamstring injury. But we saw last week with Julio, came into the game questionable with a hamstring injury, wound up playing, and then put up a massive game. Not saying that's going to happen here with DeSean Jackson, but this is a guy that has shown plenty of upside in the past. He's going to be probably their number 2 receiver behind Travis Fulgham. I'd expect him to be second on the team in targets behind Fulgham. No Zach Ertz, no Dallas Goedert. They really don't have a tight end they can go to. They have Richard Rodgers, but I don't think Richard Rodgers is going to be that involved. I really like DeSean Jackson here. I think, especially if maybe Fulgham sees shadow coverage from James Bradberry, that could definitely be a good thing for D-Jax. At 5,800, he does feel a little bit too cheap when you factor in all the injuries to the Eagles receivers. Alshon Jeffrey is still out as well. He's not going to play. I definitely like me some D-Jax. I think he is a really good, cheap captain play that gives you some upside. You play him at captain, and that's going to allow you to really spend up for, probably both quarterbacks. You could maybe get in one of the 2 running backs as well. Really, really like D-Jax. Probably one of my favorite plays overall on this showdown slate when you do factor in, salary. Jalen Reagor, another guy, still out, hasn't played since week 2, I believe. Yeah, hasn't played since week 2, so that's another injury to the Philly pass catchers. Reagor's been out. No Zach Ertz, no Dallas Goedert, no Alshon Jeffrey. Just should see plenty of targets for D-Jax, plenty of targets for Travis Fulgham, like I said earlier. But Then you have Corey Clement, who I really don't have much interest in. He's going to get a few touches as Boston Scott's backup, but if I'm going to play one of the two running backs, I'm just going to play Boston Scott. Richard Rodgers, you would assume, is going to be more involved with no Ertz and no Goddard. But what is more involved for Richard Rodgers? 4 targets, 5 targets. Sure, he's a big body. They could maybe look to him in the red zone, but I don't really want to go to him. I think you get way more upside from a guy like D-Jax. You could even save salary and play Greg Ward. I think Greg Ward makes plenty of sense. He's probably going to be the Phillies' number 3 receiver for this game. Should get anywhere from like 6 to 7 targets, maybe even more. At 4,800 as a cheap option, Greg Ward's another guy that has shown he can put up decent games. He can give you 15, 20 DK points. Still no Alshon Jeffrey, no Goddard, no Ertz, no Jalen Reagor as well. Like, there's going to be opportunity for Greg Ward. He's going to be on the field, especially like in 3 wide receiver sets. So I do like him a lot as a value. Another guy similar to D-Jax, I think just gives you plenty of upside and is too cheap in my opinion. Like D-Jax, Greg Ward, I would definitely prefer those two guys like over the kickers or the defenses. I don't really see myself going to the kickers or defenses on this slate just because you have Ward for 4,800, you have D-Jax for 5,800, two guys that I just think give you way more upside than kickers or defenses. Kickers or defenses, they're always viable. Sure, the Eagles defense, like we could see them force some turnovers. I mean, Daniel Jones has definitely thrown plenty of picks this season. He's definitely taken a ton of sacks. If I had to play one of the two defenses, I would rather play the Eagles. The kickers are always fine. Usually you only want to play one of the two, though. Normally you never see both kickers in the winning lineup. And then punt plays like under the kickers, there really isn't much down here. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside really hasn't done anything at all this season, even with all the injuries to the Philly pass catchers. Like, he's barely been involved. Kind of the same with John Hightower. He's been a little bit more involved. 6 targets week 5, 4 targets last week. He's probably going to be the number 4 receiver for the Eagles. You might see him play maybe 50, 60% of the snaps. You might see 4 or 5 targets. I guess at 1,200, he's not the worst, just punt play. Hoping you maybe he gets open on a play. Maybe he catches a touchdown. I could see using him. Like, if I had to choose someone under the kickers, I think it would be John Hightower for me. I don't really want to go to Dion Lewis or Wayne Gallman. Really no one else I want to play. So, yeah, that's just my thoughts, on the player pool from top to bottom. Not really going to touch on any of these guys down here because, they're just either not going to play enough or not going to be targeted enough to where I want to go to them. So, I think we touched on the player pool, talked about all the playable options. Let's go through, talk about roster construction real quick. Just take a look at how I'm looking to build out my lineups for this Showdown slate. I said it earlier, I do like DeSean Jackson a lot as a captain play. I think, if I'm only playing one lineup in single entry in a tournament, like, I think D-Jax as a captain does give me a lot of upside. If I'm playing him at captain, then obviously you're going to want to correlate your lineups and plug in Carson Wentz. Because if we are assuming that D-Jax goes for, 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, it's very likely that Carson Wentz is, obviously the reason why, you're probably going to want Wentz in that case. So let's plug in Wentz and correlate our lineups. Then we have just over 7,600 left for 4 spots. So we got plenty of ways we can go here. We could really load up on the Eagles. We could maybe look to someone from the Giants. I talked about Devonta Freeman. I do have interest in at 7,400. If I had to play one of the Giants pass catchers, I think I do prefer Darius Slayton. I think we have the salary, though. We can maybe play both quarterbacks in this lineup. Let's plug in Danny Jones at 10-4 and see what that leaves us. 6,700 remaining per player for our last 3 spots. Probably want to get one of the 2 running backs. I do like Boston Scott a lot at 8,400, so let's plug him in. And now we got 5,850 left remaining per player for 2 spots. So we could maybe go cheap with like Greg Ward at 4,800, and that would leave us enough to play Golden Tate. I talked about it earlier. I don't love Golden Tate, but I wouldn't mind plugging him in just to fill out that last spot. Or we could go a little bit cheaper off of Ward and play one of the kickers. Or even play John Hightower as just a straight-up punt play. That would leave us 10-5, so then we could play like Darius Slayton and leave some salary on the table. I mean, that's a lineup that you could do that I think will be pretty contrarian. I don't see many people having that lineup at all. Normally, when you leave over $1,000 on the table, that's going to make your lineup pretty contrarian. It's going to be unlikely that your lineup is duplicated, so I do like that for tournaments. I think getting both quarterbacks in makes some sense just because both quarterbacks, on this Showdown slate, I think do give you a very high floor. The ceilings on a lot of these guys are pretty limited. Like, we haven't seen much of a ceiling from Evan Engram. Travis Fulgham's definitely shown a ceiling. Boston Scott, I think, does have a ceiling here. But there's not many, Giants pass catchers that I'm very confident in, which kind of makes me want to just play Daniel Jones and then hope he kind of spreads the ball around and doesn't really lock in on one guy. So yeah, I think that's a lineup that I do like. We could maybe look to a build where we kind of pay up at captain. Maybe we go to like Boston Scott, who I talked about earlier. I do like a lot. Normally, when you're playing a running back at captain, you don't have to play one of the two quarterbacks. But we've seen Boston Scott be involved in the passing game. There could be a scenario where he puts up a really big game, and like Carson Wentz still has a good game as well. So I could definitely see plugging in Wentz here. We could maybe go with both quarterbacks again into this build. We're going to need some value, though, if we do that. So we're probably going to have to plug in like Greg Ward, plug in maybe D-Jax at 5,800. And that does leave us enough to play. I mean, we could play maybe the defense. I mean, I guess that is a build you could do. You don't really have, like, if I'm going to play a defense, I don't want much from the opposing team. I could see a scenario where maybe Daniel Jones puts up like 18, 19 points, and really none of the Giants pass catchers have like massive games. The Eagles could maybe get like a pick six or something. So you could plug in their defense. Like I said earlier, though, we could always take out Greg Ward and downgrade to maybe one of the kickers. We could plug in John Hightower as a punt play. That leaves us 9,200 exactly, so then we could plug in Darius Slayton. So, that's another lineup build that I do like quite a bit. Scott at captain, both quarterbacks, D-Jax, Slayton, then John Hightower just as like a true punt play, hoping he maybe gets like 4 catches for 40 yards. Maybe he finds the end zone and you're kind of, dancing. But 4 catches, 40 yards, that'd probably be good enough at 1,200. Especially if really, nobody puts up a massive game to where, like, you have to have them, especially, like, value-wise. Like, if D-Jax goes for 25, you're going to need him. If, Darius Slayton goes for 20, you're probably going to need him. But in scenarios where you don't see massive gains from any of those cheap guys, getting 8, 9 Draftkings points from John Hightower could be good enough at 1,200. So I don't mind plugging him in as a punt play. Like I said earlier, if I'm going to play someone below the kickers, it's going to be John Hightower. I don't feel too confident in, Arcega-Whiteside, Caden Smith, Lewis, Gallman. Hightower, he's going to be the number 4 receiver. He's not going to be nearly involved now that D-Jax is coming back, but still should see some time on the field, should get a few targets. And at 1,200 on a showdown slate, I'm always fine playing these risky, cheap guys, just hoping, maybe they find the end zone or maybe they break off a long, catch and run. So yeah, guys, I think we talked about the player pool top to bottom, talked about roster construction as well. I think we really broke everything down for this Thursday night game, so I hope you guys did enjoy this video. I do appreciate you watching. If you did enjoy, hit that like button down below. Hit the subscribe button as well. Be sure to click that notification bell so that way you do get notified every time I upload and you'll never miss out on any of my new videos. And I forgot to say this at the beginning of the video, but if you do enjoy my YouTube videos, if they really help you and you want to get more content from me, I have stuff available on Patreon. You can check out the Patreon link down below and see all that I do have to offer over there. Get access to my core plays. I will post core plays for this Showdown slate. I post core plays every week for the main slate as well. I do a breakdown article. It's usually a very in-depth article going through each position. I do that for the main slate as well. So you can check out the Patreon link down below and see all that I do have to offer over there. But best of luck on this slate, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope the video helped. I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you in the next one. Good luck, guys. Peace.